Good morning. Can everybody hear me? All right, so I know this is probably the coldest place in San Francisco today. When I was driving in, obviously, I thought I was overdressed with the sweater, but boy, am I glad I have the sweater on. But I can assure you, and as Chris said, the rest of the week for you guys is not going to be this cool. Things are going to heat up a little bit. I love coming here. This is probably, Chris, my fourth year. It is not just good to see old friends, make new ones, but realize how much the world moves in a year when you see what they're working on, what some of the advances that have been made. But probably the most exciting thing about being here is to almost like one of our phone devices, soak up the charge, as I call it, right? Is to see the excitement, is to see the hope, and to see kind of the optimism for the path forward. Personally, I love coming here because it's the only place in the world where someone calls me a global leader, right? So Chris does that. Thank you very much. What I want to do as you obviously embark on this week and its proceedings is to not lecture you on any of the topics that Chris talked about, all relevant. Not on technology, not on business, not on even the human side of it. Or you could say all of it. What I thought I'd do as we get started on this week is to reflect on on one of the things that Chris always says, and I completely believe in, which is this is going to be a journey. It's going to be a journey for a while, for a long while. It's a worthwhile journey. But like any journey, there will be days when we will say, is it too hard? There will be days when we'll say, we're doing things for the first time that have never been done before, and therefore may not be possible. There may be days on this journey when we wonder whether it's worthwhile. What I want to do very simply was to try and set the stage for you as I set it for myself every day when I get up in the morning at 5 a.m. with the golden retriever trying to get out of the house as to why I'm in this business, right? And in order to do that, I have to very simply do one thing, which is imagine myself 50 years from now living in this world, and how would I want that world to be for my friends, my family, my children, and their families going forward. So with that, I humbly submit that in my next few minutes, I'm not going to give you anything earth-shattering looking forward. Instead, I'm going to give you a little bit of my perspective looking backwards. Sometimes history is a great teacher. It's a great mentor, and it gives you a perspective on your current challenges and the future in a way nobody else can. I'm going to talk about digital innovation in the global economy, not because I love the title, but because I think Chris said that needs to be the title. So given that I was afraid if I didn't use the title, he wouldn't call me a global leader, I kept it. But really what I'm going to talk about is this notion, Chris, something is wrong because it's split. You got two foils. No, go back up.
I think they put a PDF in PowerPoint.
Oh, it should be PowerPoint. Oh, okay. Thank you. So what I'm going to start with is, I don't know how many of you have heard of Jevons paradox. So in the mid-1800s, a gentleman in England by the last name of Jevon was doing some studies. And this was an era where England was very concerned about the consumption of coal, right? And the question of the day was, will coal consumption decrease? Because it was a precious resource. Can it be controlled? And what Jevon found, and then wrote a fairly significant paper on, was that the more you increase the efficiency of the creation and most importantly, its use, the more it gets used. And the more it gets used, the more it drives efficiency into creating and using it. So if something is a precious resource, it actually will be used more of if you can make its use more efficient. Frankly, when I say it that way right now, you go, I learned this word from my teenagers, duh, right? It's obvious. Of course, something's more efficient to use, you're going to use more of it. But in the 1800s, when without coal, England, looked at the prospect of basically freezing to death in winter, this was a frightening thing. What do you mean use more of? And the very things we are doing to use it today is going to make us use more of this somewhat limited capability? Well, Jevons said yes. Face up to it, believe in it, and this is what's going to happen with every sector of the economy. The more something gets used, the more it's going to drive efficiency in its use. The more efficiency drives in its use, the more it's going to get used. And we are going to have this virtuous cycle which will lead to new uses. Because the availability and abundance of a resource, once its existing uses are made efficient, is going to generate the headroom for new uses. This is the 50th years of Moore's law, and in many ways we'll talk about that in a second. But this Jevons law, or paradox as it's often called, has been the fundamental societal underpinning that's driven us from the mid-1800s, or even before actually, from the days of the Egyptians, all the way till today, when it comes to an economy that creates, trades in, uses, and destroys resources, right? So I start here with the very simple notion that technology, IT, information technology, is no exception to this paradox or this rule, right? And again, it is a paradox. In the 1940s, I'm going to embarrass some of you. How many of you had a Commodore PC? Come on, you can admit it. All right, see, now a few more hands are going up. That was a pretty expensive item, right? It was like your car, or maybe your fridge, or cost you half the house, or whatever, right? It was not one of those things that you said, where the hell is it? I haven't seen it in the last 2 days. When someone said, well, the world's going to have many more of these, in fact, there's going to be one in every house. In fact, there's going to be one for every person, because it's going to be called a personal computer. People said, you're nuts. In fact, there are articles, and we read these articles at Intel sometimes. There are articles written called, there's only going to be one of these, or maybe 5 of these machines all over the world. They're going to be called computers. A very famous person actually said this. Just tells you, very smart and famous people can sometimes also get it wrong. That's the hope I live with every day. But I digress. What has happened for us is the information technology age around computing and then communications has exactly followed that path. We came up with more efficient ways to build computers, to build software, to use it. And those uses led from big monolithic computers to desktop computers to mobile computers to every computer that you're staring at right now instead of listening to me, and then your phones, right? Every device has computing in it. And that's essentially enabled our world from moving from what I would call the physical age to the digital age, right? It was facilitated by the fact that efficiency drove more use drove more innovation to making it more efficient, and that efficient usage created a base of availability that at the end of the day inspired people to use it in ways that they never thought of on the day that resource was first created or they saw it. That's where we are today, ladies and gentlemen. As we look at our next 5, 6, 7 decades, that is where we are today. We cannot even foresee some of the things that will happen, both good and bad, from the further penetration and the democratization of information technology. Let me give you a few examples. If you look at this picture on the right, on the left, I guess, I'm getting dyslexic a little bit, technological advances around the light bulb, right? Obviously, we all admit that the light bulb has gone through major changes over the last however many years since it was created, right? As it's gotten more efficient, it's gone from being in government-controlled roads to people's houses, to people's gardens. It's become personal and massively deployed. One of the things that has happened with it is it's not only, the wrong question is how many people have a light bulb. I know it's, as soon as I say this, some of you are smiling because you're thinking of the old joke of how many people does it take to screw in a light bulb or something, right? That's not what I'm asking. How many people's lives have been touched by a light bulb or changed or advanced is the question. And it has nothing to do with how many people have physically touched or seen the light from a light bulb. Let me give you two examples. The creation of the light bulb and putting it in the streets of London actually got crime rates down by a factor of 3. People actually started to go out in the evenings. What happened when they started to go out in the evenings? They needed to be entertained. Movies, restaurants, simple outside pubs. Entire ecosystems of services came alive because of the light bulb producing the fundamental capacity for consumers of that service. You go to a restaurateur in those days and say, you should pay homage to the light bulb. And they'd go, what? But the light bulb was the reason that hundreds of people got out in the streets in the evening after work and braved it instead of dark alleys in brightly lit streets. But then something bad happened. And if you look at this recent publication from SKY's telescope, there was so much use of that technology. One of the downsides from a societal perspective is you couldn't see the night anymore. You know, if you were a hopeless romantic, like some of us who will go unnamed, you do want to go out and see the night sky, right? And people couldn't see it. Entire cities blasted so much light, entire societies blasted so much light into the night, people lost sight of the night sky. So the other side of society, of culture, said, no, wait a minute, are we overusing that resource? Just because it's efficient and possible, should we do it? That's the other message that I think SRII has to be fundamentally in tune with. Not just whether it's possible, but whether it's truly beneficial, right? And as global leaders, we have to think about not just how to make something happen, but what that thing makes happen, right? So the digital service economy, going back to a particular example, is very well established, right? It's a service economy, except it's in the digital domain or somehow facilitated by bits and bytes being created, transported, and consumed. You know, I can give you many, many examples of that. This is in San Francisco, and the Valley is probably the worst place to give you examples because even as I speak, a new example is being created. I was at Stanford Business School 2 weeks ago for a week, and I can tell you that between the morning and the evening conversations, entire business plans had changed, right? I saw 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds pitching ideas for $50 million of initial funding, right? With astounding rates of return. So this rate and pace of businesses going digital, the macro ecosystem around the core innovations is unbounded. In fact, that is the addition or the auxiliary or the axiom to Jevon, which is very simply what you unleash can never be leashed back again, right? Who would have thought when you had the horse and the buggy, you got, what did you get? A carriage. right? What did the carriage create? It created the tire industry. It created highways. Hell, some of you can even blame McDonald's and fast food stops on highways starting from there as well. I mean, you wouldn't need on a freeway bathrooms or restaurants if people weren't using those freeways, right? So entire value chains, supply chains, get connected to these core service economies. How many of you use Airbnb here? All right. It's okay to say you use Airbnb. Let's see more hands go up. All right. See? How many of you 2 years ago, if I had said, you can go online and instead of the Hilton or the Marriott, the names with point systems associated with them, you're going to go stay there and you're going to do this auction thing. You'd go, you're nuts. I'd never take my kids and my family out on a vacation like that. Right? I want it all. I want my points. I want to know which hotel I'm staying at, and the fact that I've got a confirmed reservation. I don't particularly want to live in someone's house that I don't even know them, right? What if their dog bites me or something like that, right? By the way, these are all real things people have told me as to why Airbnb would never work, right? So the third example, the third postulate I'm going to weave in here, which is very important for SRII and us as global leaders, is the following. In your head itself is dominant logic that prevents progress. And one of the things we have to figure out is how to address that. As global leaders, we are not immune to being, struck by those same kind of things that we think, oh my God, if we could just cure people off, then all our great ideas would be adopted. No, we are walking examples of the same kinds of biases that will stall the adoption of technology, of services. And we together have to figure out how we become role models as opposed to inhibitors. Then you went up too far. They'll fire me if I don't talk about Moore's Law. So one of the things you go back and then say, well, Airbnb, Uber, the telephone. You can keep going back and saying, what were some of the seminal things that made it happen? Where was the dominant logic addressed? Where was that breakthrough? What was the one that had the most fan out in terms of its explosive effect? And I'm not saying this because I wear blue and I work for a company like Intel, but the fact that Moore's Law really made Jevons paradox come true is indisputable. Right? It democratized the ability to build intelligence and connectivity and have every life on this planet be benefited by it. Right? That's the fundamental power of Moore's Law. There's been a lot of interesting things stated like, if you were building an Intel-based Android phone using 1971 technology, in 1971 we weren't even in the nano space, we were in micron space. I actually joined Intel in 1994 and someone said, we're coming to the dangerous end, zone of Moore's Law. We are now at 500 micron. Guess what we're shipping today? 14 nanometer, right? So we as the world. So this has been a tremendous engine. And the wonderful thing, many of you, I don't know how many of you met Gordon, but the thing Gordon's most proud of is not his Moore's Law or even Intel's manufacturing or ability to keep Moore's Law going, is the fact that people have done with it things that he would have never, ever imagined were possible. Right? And that is the unleashing effect of very core innovations. That brings me back to the next postulate for SRII. There's lots of innovations needed. There's lots and lots of connected innovations needed. There's a lot of work for those innovations to be enabled in inventions and products and services. But we've got to focus on the big movers, because the big movers are the tipping points. It takes leadership to recognize which ones will be big movers. It takes persistence to persevere through their adoption. But it is what makes eras change from one to the other. I work in Intel's data center group, right? And I've been thinking about the word data center for a while now, right? And it's kind of interesting. When I first joined the data center several years ago, I won't tell you how many because it'll simply date me. All I'll say is I think, Chris, I'm, 20 years younger than you or something like that? Yeah. The data center was this big building somewhere, right? Everybody played with the coolest devices, like Alok is doing right now, right? I mean, his laptops, then came the phones, right? Those were the cool, sexy things because you could partially carry them around. And number two was they changed so often, and you could show people what you could do with them. Data centers were not. The two parts of the word data center is what I want the last postulate for SRII to be. One is it's data. Right? The data center no longer means the building. One is data. It is the next oil, right, in terms of the fundamental equity of an economy. We are going into the era not of the digital economy, but actually the knowledge economy, and that's fueled by one currency called data. Right? The second part of the word data center is it's in the center of everything. It is in the center of how we democratize knowledge. With 6 billion people rapidly going to about 7, before many of us lose interest in that topic, it is a fundamental need to democratize knowledge. And data is the chasm crosser, right? The great level playing field. The second is the notion of democratizing creativity. If you have that for data, you will then have the democratizing creativity. And that keeps the spiral going. That keeps the value of data infinite. Prith and I were talking this morning earlier about methods to value data, right? My postulate is the value of data is infinite or zero. It's zero if you don't do anything about it. It's actually negative because you'll end up spending money to store it. But it's infinite if you can use it in infinite ways. Right? And then it is the center of everything. It is what drives equity. It is what drives decision making. It is what drives advance and progress towards better methods, towards better standards of living, towards better ways of the digital world. The third is democratizing funding. Right? Data is critical, is at the center of disseminating an innovation platform, of actually creating and disseminating its availability and its ability to drive startup innovation around the world. Right? So when I use the word data center, people immediately think of massive buildings with massive field of computers. And if that's what you think, that's great. I mean, I spend 90% of my time doing that. But really, the word is data is at the center of everything. It's the data is at the center of our future, right? And what we have to do is understand what Jevon said. If we can be more efficient in the creation and use of data, we will need more of it. We will need to process more of it. And hopefully, as a result, we as a society will be more than what we are today. That's what I think of with a golden retriever at my foot, tugging to go out every morning as I look back and I see my children getting ready to go to school, albeit complaining almost every morning. With that, I leave you to look at a week of exciting advances, of knowledge dissemination, but most importantly, get your hope, optimism, and conviction up. This is a journey, and the best days are both beyond today, and they're not going to be easy, but they're going to be damn worthwhile. And that's why I think we're all in this together.